Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Epic Human Podcast. I am your host, Joe Blair, and thanks for listening today. On this episode of the Epic Human Podcast, we are going to have a conversation with Andrew Byrnes. Andrew is a venture capital investor at Comet Labs, which is an AI and intelligent machines-focused seed investor based here in San Francisco. He is a former clean tech startup founder, a high school teacher, a marketing exec, a wildcatter, and we'll talk about what wildcatting actually is, fiction author, sushi roller, and local TV show personality. In this podcast, Andrew walks us through his non-traditional career path and life path with stories that range from the dramatic and painful to the hilarious and bizarre. Andrew has this unique combination of humility, confidence, and authenticity. You get the sense that he's really just an open book, and wow, is that refreshing. For example, shortly after we first met, I asked him if he might maybe want to do a podcast, and his answer was unequivocally, yes, let's do this. No hesitation, no fear, and it's because he's been, I'll call incubating courage his entire life through a diverse set of experiences. And now he helps incubate startup companies and help the founders develop their own courage to build meaningful businesses that have the potential to disrupt huge industries. I really had fun with this one, as you could tell. So without further delay, please welcome an epic human, Andrew Byrnes. And we are live with Andrew Byrnes, and we're coming at you from Comet Labs on Market Street. Hey, Andrew, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Happy to be here. Thanks for hosting me here.
No, nice to have you at our offices.
Excellent.
And yeah, excited to be on your podcast.
Thank you. Excited to have you. So we're going to talk all about Comet Labs and the amazing companies you invest in. But first, we want to focus in on Andrew Byrnes. We want to hear all about you. So why don't you tell me just from the beginning, where did you grow up? What was the beginning of your life like?
Oh boy. I'll tell like the accelerated version. I was born in Napa, wine country.
Okay.
Moved to Alamo, and then my house burned down when I was 4, and my family was rescued by our pet collie. And so my earliest memory is actually seeing the newspapers about our house burning down. And then
Whoa.
From there, yeah, pretty epic.
That's incredible. Alamo, Texas?
No, Alamo, right across the bay here.
Okay.
By Danville.
Oh my goodness.
East Bay.
How did it start?
Cleaned out a fireplace in a paper bag, like put the ashes in a paper bag. Dog tipped the trash can. It lit some gasoline under a car in the garage. Dog jumped out of a window, broke a window, jumped out of the window, ran around and woke up my parents, and then they grabbed us from the bed, and we ran out of the house as it was burning.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And you remember it?
Yeah. And being named Andy Byrnes and growing up with that in my background was a lot of torment through my growing up years in Tucson, Arizona.
Wait, but real quick. So the dog started the fire and saved you from the fire.
Yeah,
so
the dog. That lovely dog. Yeah. She started the fire and saved the family.
Wow. She made up for it.
You got to do what you can. Yeah.
So you remember that was your earliest memory, and then you talked about Arizona. So
yep.
Walk us through.
So moved to Arizona and went to all my school there. Mm-hmm. Everything up through the end of undergrad. And just grew up. Initially, I was like a fat kid. I was really overweight. I weighed more when I was 13 than I do now.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
That's a cool fact.
Wow.
And then one day I was on a bus going to school, and this girl I liked said, "Man, if anybody has a 6-pack, I'd make out with them." I think I was in 8th grade. And so right there, I was just like, "Yeah, I'm gonna make that happen." And so over the course of the year, I lost all my weight. I wrestled. I joined the football team, and I lost tons of weight.
Wow.
And then at the end of the year party, I went swimming and showed everybody my new awesome body, and the girl didn't like me.
The six pack didn't cut it.
It just does. It doesn't cut it. Didn't cut it. Didn't mean anything at the end of the day.
So real quick before we move on, how do you think that impacted you, just in terms of you come across as a very humble person, empathic person. Do you think that has anything to do with kind of your perspective on interacting with people, understanding where people are coming from?
I don't know. Maybe I've thought about like those instances in my life for a lot of years, like kind of the cringeworthy instances.
Yeah.
And you look at them without regret. Because I have too many instances like that in my background where you could be embarrassed and regretful. Because whatever, like I think by nature, I founded a company a couple of years back, and so like definitely like I've always been like a risk taker, and just kind of being willing to try things.
Yeah.
And kind of whatever the whim is, but yeah, like empathy is I think one of the lessons that you learn early on.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of them, was like empathy for the embarrassed teenage adolescent boy in us all.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, I think that's a common thing. And most kids go through kind of an awkward stage, whether it's too big, too little, too tall, too short, whatever it is. But I've noticed a theme, particularly with people who are kind of naturally overweight as kids who have that. So anyway, we're getting back to Arizona. You went there for undergrad. You went to University of Arizona.
I went to the University of Arizona.
And what'd you study there?
Biochemistry and creative writing.
Okay, so that I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Tell me about those two sides of your brain and how you ended up majoring in both of those things.
Yeah, right. Again, like kind of floating in the wind. So I was a big cross-country runner, and actually walked on to the team at U of A, and ran for 1.5 years, and then both my knees blew up. But that's another story. It's like all these silly things. So my cross-country coach in high school was a MD and kind of a mentor for me, and he studied biochemistry and he recommended it. And so I started with that. I was going to graduate in 2 years, and I was like the most immature, sophomore on all of University of Arizona campus. So I had to take a second degree because I didn't want to leave, and I totally wasn't ready. And so I liked writing silly little stories, and so I took creative writing, and that extended out to like a traditional 4-year program. And yeah, after graduating, I actually spent like 3 years just like bumming around the country and writing books.
So I absolutely want to ask you about that. I got that on my list. But you mentioned before the podcast that you had a story about you're not new to broadcasting.
No. One of my for a couple of years, a buddy and I we had a public access TV show in Tucson called the Jet Guido and Andy Byrnes Show. Really original name. And yeah, I spent like 2 years I think it was every Wednesday night going to the public access TV station and just broadcasting live for I think it was 45 minutes, like whatever we wanted to do.
Did you play music or you just talked? Or
no, like every week was different, right? We usually came as like different characters. Like one time we dressed up like robots. We wrapped ourselves in tinfoil, and I think I was a pirate robot, and he was like a pornographic robot. Another time, like my favorite one ever. Can I swear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll keep it light. We put on so it was like a half hour, 45-minute long show. And one day we said, okay, let's go on. And do you remember the song? It was from South Park the movie.
I watched that movie. Yeah.
And the song was called Uncle Effer.
Yeah.
You remember that song?
Yeah.
It was like
the Canadian.
No. It was the Canadian guys, Terrence and Phillips.
Yeah.
Shut your effing face, Uncle Effer. There, I'm not swearing. So we put that song on repeat, and we wore I think it was 15 layers of clothes. Didn't say a word the whole time, and so initially we just stood in front of the camera and stared and didn't move. After the first repeat, we took off the top layer of clothes, and then it played again, and we moved a little bit more. So by the whatever the 15th time we were in our boxers, like sprinting around the room, like basically in seizures, just repeating this really aggressively obnoxious song. And then at the end of it, and it was just me and him in this studio, and it was live, so we didn't really know like what was happening until we walked out to leave the building, and there was a line of like 10 people just screaming at the station manager, like, these guys should be on the air, like, how can you do this? There they are. And we just ran to our car and drove off.
Holy moly.
Yeah,
whoa.
that was great.
That's insane. So it was audio and video.
Oh yeah, no, it was live TV.
Oh wow, that's insane.
But yeah, like that one got us some street cred, and like we were famous. Like people would recognize us. I was a busser in a restaurant, and like every night someone would recognize me, and that was my taste of fame. that was awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Good times.
And so then you graduate with these 2 degrees, and then you mentioned you went right into becoming an author.
Yeah.
Were you kind of on the fence at that point? Like, do I want to approach writing versus biochem?
No. So yeah, I was pre-med, and I did like the med school stuff. What's the
MCAT?
The MCAT.
Yeah.
I took it twice. Got the same score both times. And then like did a bunch of applications. Went to Hawaii. And I was like in the year between, and I was a sushi roller in a nightclub in Honolulu. And then I grew out my hair really long and dyed it blonde, and came back to all my med school interviews like wearing an Aloha shirt with this huge blonde afro. And yeah, I didn't get into medical school, and I took that as like okay, maybe I'm not cut out for medicine. So yeah, I spent 3 years like writing books. I wrote 3 fiction books that have never been published. I think the 3rd one is the best one. And
cool.
But yeah, it was just kind of
what are they about?
Oh gosh, the first one was about like border politics and religion, and you can imagine how good that was. The second one I wrote, and I wrote that one in Hawaii, and then second one I wrote in South Florida. I met this chick in Hawaii. And then she left 2 months later to go to Telluride, and I went to Telluride to meet her without telling her, and the chick became my wife. Okay. And then we bounced around the country a lot together. So that was my big lifetime romantic gesture, was meeting her at the airport in Telluride.
Was she surprised?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit mad.
Creeped out?
Yeah, totally. And then yeah, like I'll never forget it. Like 2 weeks after that, we're walking down the street in Telluride. Like no money, like living in this awful bedroom in a house. And the conversation started going about like, yeah, I really like you. I moved here for you. And she goes, yeah, I think that's really cool, but I just don't see a future. Yeah, and that was like 14 years ago. So
and you're like, I'll show you.
That's right. I'll show you, Patty. Yeah. And so anyway, so then we moved to South Florida, like on a whim. Again, I don't know how we got there. Lasted a month in Miami Beach before we had to like retreat to Fort Lauderdale. And South Florida was definitely like the weirdest place I've ever been.
Really?
Like so far as people and the culture and the community, like tons of fun, but very different than growing up kind of like West Coast, Arizona, California. Yeah. And so I wrote a book about that. It was a story about a guy who has kind of a mental breakdown, and one night he looks through, back when people had phone books, so I'm dating myself a little bit here, but he was looking through the white pages, right, and to find his name, because he was like, oh, where am I? And there was 5 other people with the same name as him in like the Miami area. So he found, like, he went to meet all of them, and ended up like having a relationship with one of the other guys that has the same name. So that was that one.
Cool. That was number 2?
That was number 2.
Okay.
And then the third one I actually wrote after, like, way later, after I worked in clean tech.
Okay.
For a while.
Okay, gotcha.
And then clean tech industry like blew up in 2009.
Yeah, we'll get there. But so you did the second book. You're in Florida, and then what?
And then moved to Colorado.
Where?
Boulder.
Yeah.
And awesome. Yeah, which was amazing. And I moved there with this marketing gig. I was writing website content. And so like as writers, you get into like weird situations because it's hard to make money. And I was writing like really spammy websites for online mortgages and payday loans.
Wow.
For this company in South Florida. That was another really big learning experience. Like, and why like I work in clean tech and impact. Like I did spend like a year and a half working in this industry where it was like very bottom line. And not a very nice place to be.
Unscrupulous.
Yeah.
Kind of taking advantage of people in a way.
Yep. But yeah, just I was writing the websites for it.
Okay.
For this, like it was an SEO company.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wrote one called The Mortgage Pirate, and it was a pirate themed website about mortgages. I co-wrote with this like world famous. I think he's world famous now. He was on the team that did the Breakfast with the King Burger King commercials.
Oh yeah.
But this was his first marketing gig. His name was Craig, and we wrote a website called Loan Me Tender. And it was an Elvis-themed website about payday loans, and every page was like it was a parody of a different Elvis song. Like it was, right, so like we had a lot of fun with it. But anyways, I moved to Boulder with that.
Yeah.
And then that was like it was like the rising tide of wind energy.
Right.
So like the mid 2000s, like late 2000s, like
What
2006.
Year? 2006. Okay.
Around. Yeah. And got a job with a wildcatter out in Boulder, like just doing like wildcat land leasing and like way early stage development around like Four Corners in Texas.
So maybe explain what wildcatting is.
Yeah, wildcatting. I mean, it's really just like going out and like scooping up a bunch of land leases, right? So NREL or whatever these national labs would have a wind map, like a general wind map, and you're a bunch of dudes with some cash and a dream to build wind projects. You don't really know much of what you're doing, but you do know how to go out and talk to people like these big landowners and say, hey, you have this site. I think there's wind on it. I'd like to do this land lease.
Is this the same thing that people used to do in oil and gas?
Yeah,
like
very much. And solar. I mean,
Okay.
like, and that was what like I actually got away from wildcatting and more into like the later stage development.
Yeah.
But like
that's what they used to call like a land guy. Like
like land guys.
Yeah. Okay.
Kinda.
Wildcatting. I haven't heard that.
Yeah,
term. Okay.
wildcatting.
So you were doing wildcatting.
So we was
in Boulder, out of Boulder.
Out of Boulder.
Yeah.
And then moved from there to a company called Renewable Choice, doing like carbon offsets and renewable energy credit stuff. And that's when I started talking to a bunch of utilities about their like clean energy programs and stuff like that, because we were one of the first ones actually going out to utilities to try to buy them. We were buying those RECs and carbon offsets for like consumer markets. And then I got poached from there to work with a more formal wind and solar developer called the Martifer Group, which is a big Portuguese company that was really active in the late 2000s.
Also in Boulder?
No, that was in San Diego, and
wow.
So picked up. Oh yeah, man.
You're on the move, man.
I haven't lived in one place. Like Bay Area is definitely the longest one that I've lived in since leaving Tucson. Yeah, Rolling Stone, man.
Very, very cool. So then you're in San Diego doing.
Yeah, doing wind and solar development.
Right.
In finance, right? So I just started learning spreadsheets and got taught by a bunch of old oil and gas guys who were just like spreadsheet wizards.
Yeah.
And so I became like this financial analyst for wind energy and got pretty good at it. And then also like negotiating like turbine purchase agreements and like offtake agreements with like utilities like PG&E. Like we did a couple of those, like, and I talked with most of the utilities in Texas. Never got one, but learned a lot about wholesale markets and hedge agreements and kind of the nightmare that's like grown into. Not nightmare, but like really interesting dynamics on the pricing for wind energy in Texas, where like they're like they sell the energy at a loss because of the value of the tax.
Right.
Actually brings them up to positive. Right, like those types of things.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we also started building solar, and our projects initially were solar thermal, and we were doing some of the bigger, like a big solar thermal development in the Central Valley of California, and that was one of our projects. And yeah, like I was in this room with a bunch of bankers and lawyers and land developers talking about, well, the cost of, like, what about photovoltaic?
Yeah.
And like, I'll never forget being in this room, and we were all talking about PV photovoltaics as an option, as an alternative to the solar thermal.
Right.
And we were looking at it from a financial spreadsheet basis. And the question came, and we were looking, okay, like let's think about that. There's cost downs in all these different technologies. You have these new startups coming up in the valley that are working on even newer solar technologies, like newer, better, greater. What's the difference? Like, what's the difference between silicon A, silicon B, silicon C, thin film A, thin film B? Like how do we do this? And they were like, well, it's just the dollar per watt. And I was like, no, like we need to understand what the difference is. And we were talking about like multi-billion-dollar developments, and no one in this room of like 20 people like knew anything about solar. And so that's when I started looking at solar. And then the crash in energy of like 2009, 2010. My company ceased to exist. That's another interesting story. Yeah.
And what was that transition like for you, going from being a writer to and SEO kind of marketing all the way over to more scientific engineering, finance? Like,
sure,
what was that? I mean, was it more just a matter of necessity, or was it also somewhat directed by you and
no,
kind of your
like
preferences?
No, so definitely it was. I fell in love with renewables. Like my first job was as a marketing writer in renewables, and within a month I was doing like more like project siting and engineering work.
Yeah.
Because whatever, like some level of math background.
Right.
So really it was more about like really being just like psyched about like sustainable energy.
Yeah.
And also like being excited about like a transformation of a really large industry into a new way of operation. Those were the things that I like really fell in love with. Again, like it was one of those boom cycles in energy where it was like the ride was really steep, and it was really exciting for a couple of years, and I got directed towards the finance, just because I was like hanging on, and that was my position in life. But again, like when in those meetings, and I started digging into the solar technologies, and then when my company like evaporated, and I got a job I was a high school chemistry and geometry teacher for a couple of years, and during that time I was also like doing a deeper dive into solar and battery technologies, just kind of like self-guided research, and like went and started talking to professors around California about their research, and then applied to a bunch of schools who were doing like really cool stuff in solar materials for a graduate program, and got into Stanford, and then that was a big life pivot.
Sure.
Was come back to like do a deep dive into semiconductor physics, and but with a big focus on solar and battery technologies. Yeah, like one of the most interesting decisions I've made in my life.
Wow, so you went from, man, this is really interesting. So writer to marketing to renewable finance, project development, land guy, to high school teacher, to Stanford graduate school. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. No, and yeah, it gets, I mean, and then when I started here, right, I still had this like finance. When I started at Stanford, I still had this like finance bent, and I was in this really hardcore science thing, and that's kind of a theme in my life, is, you know, very like different hemispheres of my brain, like needing kind of to like each eat a lot. Right, your more creative side and your more analytic side. Sure. And like in grad school, I got caught in this thing of like looking at like really more like physics and a lot of math, and that type of universe. Right. And I started like lusting after the simplicity of a spreadsheet. And so I right across the street here, on the other side of third, I worked for a couple of years during grad school at the California Clean Energy Fund, like doing like as an associate, as a venture associate, just doing like due diligence and like some light duty analyses of clean tech companies.
Like venture
startups? It was a small venture fund.
Yeah.
Like very early stage stuff. And yeah, like that was neat though. I got like to help out some thin film CAD-tel companies that were growing up in the Valley at the time. And got a really broad perspective of like what people are working on in different pieces of the energy market.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And you were there for like while you were at Stanford?
While I was at Stanford.
Okay.
Yeah, for like pretty much the full, like after my first quarter at Stanford, I got this internship that turned into like a more formal role. And yeah.
And then you stayed on there after? Or?
No, because I started my company while I was in grad school.
Oh, okay. So tell us about the company.
Yeah, like so that started. It was really just like a buddy of mine in grad school who I met. He wasn't in my program, but he was like a neighbor, cool guy, like an Oxford PhD in some chemical engineering.
Okay.
So like much smarter than me. And he was at Stanford, I think, for the management science and engineering program. He wanted to take this class in the D school, in the D school on campus.
Yeah. Well known.
Called Launchpad.
Okay.
And it was kind of this buzzy thing. It was only for grad students. You had to apply beforehand with an idea to get in. They were pretty selective, or so it was like marketed. Really, they were just looking for people who were kind of gung ho and batty about starting companies.
Okay.
And the premise of the Launchpad company, which we got into, was like really trying to compress the experience of a startup over the first 2 years into 8 weeks. Right, like how can you show like the growth of what a startup, what like usual startups experience?
Yeah.
How can you compress that down into like a single quarter?
Wow, that's pretty audacious.
Yeah, and but they were like real companies, and so like it was two professors in the D school, they like cracked the whips. Every week was like the first. So the way we got in was you met with the teachers like a month before, and then they say, okay, cool, next week bring a prototype. And we wanted to build this thing that could charge a phone from like a cooking fire. That was our idea. Was like, hey, let's use thermoelectrics. Why? I don't know, because we haven't seen one of those, and it's the neat thing. Like let's try.
Yeah,
and so
theoretically, there's like some high energy density in the
actual
like flame.
Exactly. It's a greater energy. So everybody was like, what we learned, like the question we always got was like, what's the efficiency of your thermoelectric? And it's like 2%, but that's not what matters. It's like how much energy is in a unit of fire,
right?
And it's dramatically higher than in a unit of sun. So even though our conversion efficiency was 2% versus like 20 or 24 or whatever for like the best solar cells, we were just dealing with more concentrated energy.
Right.
And then like so initially we went in to pitch this thing of like, okay, we want to charge our phones from toasters, and all the other companies were software, right? It was Stanford. And I think the teachers thought we were crazy. And then they said, okay, build a prototype and bring it in next week. And we had never seen a thermoelectric. So we just went out and like I went to Ace Hardware and bought like a barbecue starter, and I cut up a wetsuit and wrapped it around for thermal insulation between inside and outside. Wired up some thermoelectric modules, and like brought in this Frankenstein thing, like slammed it on the table a week later, and they're like, all right, you're in. And then we did the program. Yeah. Sorry.
That sounds amazing.
If my original co-founder, I won't name him if he's listening, he like the week, I think it was 2 weeks before we ended, he came to my house and he's like, yeah, like you're one of the worst human beings I've ever met. We have totally different value streams, and you'll never make money off of this. And like I'll never forget it. And I was like, man, I have no idea what I said to this guy.
Right.
It was probably something really bad to elicit that kind of response. But like, so that's something like for years, like even whatever, like it's 5 years now, 6 years now. And like, I still like, I like lose sleep over that.
Oh, man.
Because like, right, you get so excited in like in the Silicon Valley, right? It's energy, it's go.
But that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, because there's two issues. Number one is that it's a very high intensity environment, high stakes relationship. And number two is some people just like they don't have that chemistry. And I always say, I always think back. So I was a solo founder with my company, but which I wouldn't recommend either.
No.
But I strongly feel that being co-founder is kind of like being married. And I mean, you can't marry anybody, right? It's got to be like this magical chemistry.
Yeah.
And if it isn't, then it can be like a bad marriage where it goes up in flames.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's that uncommon.
Yeah. No. I agree. Like still though, right? I'm a sensitive man.
Yeah. No. Of course.
I have feelings. And like I really like the guy, and I just like I still like, but yeah, right. My experience over the last couple of years, like whatever, I was with my startup for 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Most of my experiences are really positive. There's a couple in there where it's like, just the reality of operating a startup. Like sometimes you don't make friends with everybody.
Of course.
And kind of a bummer, but.
And so then you took it forward.
So I took it forward,
okay.
brought on like another co-founder,
okay.
And like we ran it. It was pretty exciting, right? Like we just started in my garage, like with all like I think our first seed round was $5,000. Right? This is a very naive, amazing time.
Yeah.
$5,000, and I think I put in like 4,000 of my student loan money to like fund stuff, and we were still in grad school at the time, but then we won like I think it was 15,000 at a business plan competition, and we were like ooh, and then we got into Stanford's business incubator, and we said and then like the fairy dust of like I call it like the magic dust of Stanford like kicked in a little bit, and we were able to raise a seed round like pretty pretty good, because I think we got a really compelling message around, right? It was still charging mobile phones,
and the main application is for like disaster.
No, so like it was emerging markets.
Emerging markets.
And we got in at like a pretty cool time when like it was there was just right. Billion people have phones, and like none of them have electricity.
Yeah.
It's like how do you solve that problem? Well, you can do it with solar battery systems, you can do it with gravitational systems, you can do it with run of water systems. None of these things are like an on-off switch.
Right.
Like they're all kind of dependent on except for the gravity one. I think that one is interesting, but that has moving parts.
Yeah, that
right.
Was
And
tough.
like I went to Africa for my sister did Peace Corps, and I was in the middle of Niger with her in a village for a couple months. Way back when. That was cool.
So emerging markets, just giant markets.
Yeah, right.
Compelling use case.
So we ran with that. Our first product, like we launched in the U.S., went nationwide in REI with our first product, and then started selling internationally. Yeah, that was a trip.
That's cool. It's like my favorite store.
Yeah. No, and like that was one of my favorite stories. Is like that was one of the most exciting moments of like my professional life, was also like simultaneously the most like terrifying moment was walking into REI and seeing our product on a shelf. And you walk in, you're like, where is it? There it is. And you see it on a wall, and like it's like rainbows and sunshine are pouring into your brain, and then your field of view opens up to the 20 other products like surrounding it on the wall, and then you go and then you step back, and there's 200 products in your field of view in a store of like 10,000 SKUs.
Yeah.
And to me that was like my first big like oh shit moments as a founder of I really don't know what to do right now. I know this is a big problem because no one knows what this technology is. Like like, and I don't know, like we hadn't raised, you know, like a lot of money. We had a couple $100K when we again, like nationwide and REI off the bat.
Wow.
And immediately it was like, like crap, we need to become a marketing company.
Yeah.
And right, if I were to go back in time, I wouldn't have done a consumer startup. I'm not that guy.
Okay.
And I'm not that founder.
Just because you have to be like a PR
ninja?
Is that why?
That's kind of.
Yeah.
Like you need to be a PR ninja. Like our business plan, our fundraising strategy, none of it was based on like supporting a product nationwide in a retail setting.
That's amazing.
That I didn't have any of that background. My co-founder was this like introspective, you know, energy geek, kind of like me.
Right.
Right. And
so what happened to that other market you were going after?
So the emerging markets.
The emerging markets.
Yeah, like it's we got some traction. Like we distributed a couple thousand in Africa and India. But we kept running into the same problem of like the cost of our system needed to be radically low. Right. And
to sell to the base of the pyramid.
Right. Exactly. Like and even though like in my universe, you know, you always think about dollar per watt hour, that type of stuff, and you can make a case as like, look, this is the cheapest way to charge a phone in the world.
Yeah.
People still want to pay like $5 for it, $10, and you're like, and then my message is like, well, I have this 3-watt charger. I want to sell it at $20 a watt, right? Like that's $7 a watt. Yeah. Or no, I want to sell it for $20 a unit. That's $7 a watt ish, like $6.80. Like for me to accomplish that, I need to make it for like $2 a watt.
Yeah.
Which we were like at, and that's comparable with utility scale, like CapEx costs.
Right.
And as soon as you start looking at that, you're like, this is really hard. This is hard stuff.
Yeah.
And my margins are garbage.
Right.
Because I need to sell it to the guy who's going to distribute it for whatever. If I can make it for 10, I need to sell it to him for 12, and then he needs to pay the importers, and they need to pay this guy. And then at the end of the day, like nobody makes money.
Yeah.
Or other people make money except us. And so that's when we started looking at, you know, mobile payments, and we got into Orange's incubator, and we started moving more aggressively and through like telecom channels. Met with the team at Safaricom and talked about piggybacking on their, what was it, M-Pesa is the payment platform, right? They were doing M-Copa with the financing the solar systems.
Gotcha.
And a lot of companies started springing up around that. But then we put on our thinking hats and said like, well, like what's the real value of being able to communicate with these devices? Like, is it just financing, or is there other services you can provide? And so then we started doing a pivot into like using like collecting the data and running machine learning to automate operations and maintenance protocols for distributed energy systems. Ran with that for a couple of years. Realized it was a really hard, expensive problem.
Yeah. The emerging markets aspect is tough.
Sure.
I did some work with an organization called Engineers Without Borders while I was in Colorado, living in Denver, and we did all this amazing work on this potable water system in the Andes Mountains of Ecuador, and the organization is fantastic. They figured out, you know, how to, from an engineering perspective, how to get this water to the community, and then also did a wonderful job of training the community and how to build these tanks and lay these pipes themselves. But the toughest part was actually on the financing, in that in order to make it sustainable, your average person in this town had to pay like 10x what they normally paid as like a utility bill, and that was just a really tough thing to communicate and for them to accept. I mean, just even for us, like imagine if someone said to you tomorrow, like, oh, your utility bill from PG&E has to be 10x next week. You'd say, well, I don't need whatever they're offering that bad.
Yep.
I'm making it work the way it is. And they didn't have a lot of money. A lot of their money came from the government. A lot of their money came from selling agricultural products at the like market where they had to like drive like 2 hours to get to anyway. So they just didn't have a lot of disposable income to spend on things, even if they really needed them.
Yeah.
So totally identify with that problem. So you ran this company for how many years?
Like 5.
5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what happened? And then how did you get involved with Comet? Was that the
So I mentioned my second co-founder, Adam. So Adam started going on all these manufacturing trips. I'm going to throw you under the bus, Adam, in China as we were ramping. And on one of his manufacturing trips, like to Shenzhen, he met a group of dudes who were thinking about starting a really cool new fund focused on AI, machine learning, and robotics, called Comet Labs. And he walked into the office after that trip. He goes, "Yeah, we need to talk." And I said, "What about?" He said, "Well, I think it's time we part ways." And I said, and I think I said a lot of things that I can't repeat. And then I didn't talk to him for about a year, and then we started running with each other. And then when I was moving on from Stower, I went running with him, and I was like, "Hey, dude, how you guys doing? What are you doing? Like, I'd love to work with you again." He goes, "Yeah, me too." And so that's actually how I started working with Comet.
Oh wow.
Was Adam was my co-founder, my second co-founder.
Yeah.
And I really liked what they were doing here.
Yeah.
We were building some like machine learning tools. My passion is like sustainability and energy.
Right.
But I also recognized through my work at Stower, and a lot of the partnerships that we were doing with these larger like industrial partners, the value of like an entity that invests in startups like what Comet does, but like half of what we do is just like an educational bridge between like corporate entities in different industry verticals, and finding out a way to like facilitate the conversation with the startup community, both on like right when you we had this deal with Whirlpool with my startup.
With Stower?
Yeah, with Stower. Yeah. Stower and Whirlpool, we signed this big deal to try to launch our like some larger systems in India, and the conversations there, like it was very much like we were speaking a different language, right, between like startup language and corporate language.
Yeah, very common disconnect,
right? And a lot of the disconnect is actually on like expectations around like the partnership. Like what is the best structure for a corporate startup partnership to be able for where both sides can be successful,
right?
And that's something that I like, I was hitting my head against like a wall for a while with them, but also something that I started like just getting more passionate about in the ecosystem, and also realizing that with IoT and with machine learning technologies, it's not going to be like platform technologies coming. It's not going to be like a new agriculture producer who's just using new technology is going to wipe out all the others. It's no. It's going to be the leaders are going to adopt these technologies, and that's how these industries are going to be transformed with these types of technologies. So like there's a huge need for like I think a founder focused group to facilitate those communications and like the learning and the evolution of introductions, growing into pilots, growing into commercial arrangements.
Right. So you have these relationships with all these giant companies.
Yeah.
And can you talk about the types of industries as well as like the types of the types of engagement you have with these companies?
Yeah.
Because it's not super formal, right?
No, it's not super formal. The industries really like we're kind of industry agnostic, right, just so long as it makes sense for these technologies to work in that industry. So like we talk a lot with, we have a lot of telecom partners, again through our relationship with Orange, but also they do a lot of work with smart cities, and talking with governments, and there's tons of interest from government entities in the space. Automotive is a big one. right? Because of autonomous driving, more like manufacturing based industries, definitely logistics and warehousing, agriculture. Mine is energy, which is still like a little weird about like where's the right place for these types of technologies in the energy ecosystem. I think there's some like cool transformations happening, like you and I talked about with electric cars.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the growth of that, right? Even though it's still really early, and the penetration of these cars like is so low that it's not like there's not really a lot of problem today around like how do you power a fleet of electric cars, but yeah, as that adoption increases, I think the infrastructure needs behind electric vehicle charging is going to be like overwhelming. So like that's part of what we do is like identify future trends,
right?
And how can these technology sets like be a best fit solution for helping societies cope with those trends.
Yeah, especially on the EV side, as you start to think about you reaching a tipping point where it becomes economically irrational to and maybe just kind of culturally irrational to buy an internal combustion engine.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's going to be a waterfall of electric vehicle sales. And the utilities are not prepared for that.
No, and there's a lot of government activity too in this space of saying, thou shalt not build internal combustion engines, and by this date, like you have to have this percentage of electric vehicles in your fleets.
It's happening more and more.
And it's happening more and more.
And now even OEMs are making announcements saying we're going to stop. We're going to be all electric. Was it Volvo?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Everybody's going batty over electric cars. But right, it's interesting. So our parent at Comet is a company called Legend Star, which is one of the biggest and oldest venture funds in China. And like they are driving this market, like the manufacture of electric vehicles, the deployment of electric vehicles, both like for personal use but also bus fleets, like Shenzhen switching out their whole fleet of buses to be 100% electric. Like whether or not it actually happens and becomes a reality, but the stated timelines of what they're doing, like it's super aggressive.
Yeah.
And like they are going very hard on electric cars because it solves like a couple like higher level problems for China, like pollution, access to gas, like just gasoline, right? Those supplies over the future, like those are unpredictable
strategically.
Yeah, right, and
geopolitically.
Exactly.
Difficult.
One of the things that like I talk a lot about with my friends and just more like thought exercises is like, I phrase it like how can you deploy these technologies to like what can you do with these technologies to make hypermassive population centers sustainable? And by that it's like when in the US like you have a couple large population centers, but it almost pales in comparison to the size of these like urban areas in Asia.
Right.
And like what does a sustainable look like? What does a sustainable solution look like for these places and in all these industries? Right. And like getting people and goods from one place to another, feeding them, getting them water. Like how can technology like help make these things sustainable?
Absolutely.
So you can like maintain, if not improve, the quality of life in these areas, and that's
what you do.
That's what I do
every day. So tell me about how you invest. Like what stage, how and what do you look for?
Yeah. So Comet Labs, we're seed and early stage. Initially, like over the first couple of years of we've only been investing for like 2.5 years.
Okay.
Over the first period of our existence, we did 40 investments like really fast, and they were relatively small checks, but again like seed stage. Our check sizes have gotten larger, and the traction that we're looking for is getting more advanced as we make investments. Right, it's just kind of evolving like as our fund grows. We're also starting to reinvest in companies in our portfolio, which is exciting. And Yeah.
Can you tell us about some of your recent investments, some of your portfolio companies?
Sure. Recently, so we were excited about Lightform, which is a company that we invested in last year.
What do they do?
I actually don't know if I can talk about them.
Okay. Is there one that's more public you can talk about? Or are they all in stealth? If they are, that's okay.
Well, I mean, like a lot of like I'm always hesitant to talk about like what they actually do in a public setting. I guess the one that I really like is a company called Arch, and they just do a lot of edge analytics and operations and maintenance. Like automation for more traditional manufacturing floors.
Okay.
So like really making like, the example that they give that I really like is making like an old like 40-year-old sewing machine smart by having a little bit of IoT in there, but a lot of analytics and processing capabilities.
Gotcha.
So that's a company that I really like. And so really what we look for in teams, again, like I'm pretty passionate. Well, I really like founding teams that are complementary, right? You said, like solo founders, like, right. Having somebody with a really clear vision about what the company ought to be, and like, it's almost like more of like a product guy, and then a hardcore awesome technologist. Like those are the teams that like a technology visionary and like a 10x engineer. Like those are the teams of founders that like really resonate with me. And again, because you're going into these you're going into industry, like traditional industries. So having somebody who understands those industries and like the real pain point in them, is valuable.
Knows how to speak the language.
Yeah, right. Another one that we invested in that's kind of like that is a company called Abundant Robotics, and they're an apple picking robot. The founder is this amazing technologist, and he was actually solo for a while, and he I think he was at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, I think, just for a couple of years, just exploring the market, like a genius robot guy, and then he discovered this need in apple harvesting, and why like the combination of robotics and vision and all kinds of all these AI tools, like where in the market it can be of value, and then he brought on this like just rock star team of like co-founders, CEO, and all these other people to like support him and just grow, and they're doing really really well, just pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I love problem focused companies as opposed to like technology first focused companies, right?
For sure.
If you have a key insight on, hey, there's a big problem here, and here's how you quantify it, and here's what's missing.
Yeah.
And then you build a technology piece that's from other types of technologies from other industries, like that's pretty compelling.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
exciting.
I mean it's an interesting portfolio. And yeah, like I'm psyched with the like getting to know the founders.
Yeah.
Right. Being a founder myself.
Right.
Like, I like to think of myself as I'm the grittiest warrior on the planet when it comes to founders. I feel like I got my butt kicked for a good not 5 years, 3 years. The first 2 years were awesome. The next 3 were like a wrestling match. Like gloves off, dip your fists in glass and glue, slugfest. Right, that's what happens with hardware.
Yeah.
But yeah, like getting to know the founders, and just right, like now, like my job is I love what I do, because I get to meet a lot of really awesome people, and then I get to help them like make decisions that like collectively we think are gonna like give them a better opportunity for success,
Right.
Without needing to do all the work, and worrying about all the stuff that founders need to worry about when it gets real.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks for telling us about Comet Labs. This is a really inspiring space, and I've taken a peek at your portfolio, and I think it's super exciting. So now we'll just go into a few kind of quick fire questions.
Okay.
For you. So just what do you like to do for fun? You're like, fun? What's fun?
Well, I have a 1.5-year-old and a half-year-old.
Yep.
So I guess now it's like sleep when I can. Like, I think that's pretty fun. No, I'm a big runner. Like I live over in Pacifica and I'm on the trails a lot.
Oh, you live in Pacifica?
I do.
And you drive up here? Okay.
Half-hour commute.
It's not bad.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I do a half and half. I drive and then bike.
Okay.
But like, yeah, I mean that's my idea of fun right now.
Yeah.
Is sleeping while the sleeping's good.
I hear you.
I don't know. Yeah, like I used to be big into marathons, run like trail running, but yeah, I don't know. Next question.
Yeah, sure. So what? Fair enough. I completely identify. Next question would be, what do you believe that other people don't believe?
What do I believe that other people don't believe?
Yeah. What do you believe that's an unpopular opinion? What's your most unpopular opinion? Whether it's professional or personal.
That's a good question.
It's a tough one.
I think I know, like, so again, like with my background,
Yeah.
I think I don't know if, like, what do I believe that other people don't, but I definitely, like, I believe in me, when other people may not always believe in me. And that's I think that is something that has, like, always drives me. To just, right, like, don't be afraid to try new things, and, like, even if you, like, mess up and you're horrible at it the first time, like, just having the belief that, like, yeah, but I'll learn and do better the next time, and better and better and better. And I think that's something that, like, I've always had, and, like, I don't know, I guess that's would be my answer.
Is that innate, or is that, I mean, is that partially from the fact that you've done so many different types of things?
Yeah, I think it's genetic, man. Like,
Yeah.
I think genetically I'm predisposed to try weird stuff, and keep trying, like, again, like, kind of being fearless.
Yeah.
As you go into things.
Yeah.
Right, like being able to, yeah.
That's right. When I asked you to do this podcast, you were just like, yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah, we want to, yeah.
Of course, you've already been on TV and done a lot of crazy things.
I'm
so
famous.
This is easy.
I'm famous.
Next one is, if we're looking at a nice skyline here of San Francisco. If you could put a billboard in the middle of San Francisco, I'm stealing this question from Tim Ferriss, but if you could put the billboard in the middle of San Francisco and have it say anything you wanted, what would you say?
Oh no, I actually. Like,
did you think I was asking a different question?
No, but
okay.
So, like, I know what I'd want to talk about. I don't know what would be on the billboard, but, like, I'd want to talk about love.
Okay.
Like, that's one thing that, again, it's like you get so caught up in the valley of speed and, like, you know, money. I'm a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
My mother is rolling around in Arizona saying, "Oh no, why aren't you a doctor?" And all my, like, yeah, everybody's like, "Why are you working in venture?" Because it's a competitive, fast moving space.
Right.
But, like, you just lose sight of like the things that are like really valuable. And yeah, so I guess my billboard that I'd want up is, like, right, it's very hippie. It's like, let's talk about love.
Love each other.
I don't know, or just like a big heart with wearing cowboy boots and, like, with a burrito in one hand. I don't know, I'm thinking of all the things I love, and and my daughter and son in the other, and just being like, yeah, thumbs up.
Cool. That's cool.
Right, like that's something that, like, I really, like, I want to explore more, right? And I think part of it comes from, like, startup experience in the consumer space.
Yeah.
Right, like and that's, oh god, my life is all startups. But right, that's, like, what people really resonate with.
Yeah.
Like on like a public perception is, like, I believe it's when you fall in love with something.
Right.
Like, those are the things that are successful. Like, those are the things that matter. Right. It's not so much the technology and like what it does and how it does it. It's like how do new technologies resonate with people? Like, and again, that's more of a consumer facing thing.
Gotcha.
But, like, this, like, really like emotion of like, I love this.
Yeah.
And like expanding that outward to like, just like, a heart and some mountains.
It's beautiful.
Like get outside.
That's a beautiful.
Love.
That's a beautiful vision.
We're in San Francisco. Let's do it.
Yeah. Wow. That's way better than I was expecting.
I don't know. What would your billboard say?
I'm glad you asked me because I haven't thought about it, so I'm gonna think on my feet. I don't know. I've been really into mindfulness recently and like meditation and just 5 minutes a day of just closing my eyes and breathing. And I have always been super skeptical of meditation because it always sounded too hippy dippy, and I always kind of had this idea that like, well, my mind's too active for meditation. I can't like clear my head. And the more I learn about it, the more I learn that actually everybody has that experience who tries to meditate, and it's completely normal. And it's and if you can get past that and just do it, it can actually help in terms of managing your emotions. And my new mantra, not a real mantra, but the thing I think about is respond, don't react. And with kids, as you know, they can drive you crazy.
Yeah. I react.
But I'm trying to like catch my first reaction, acknowledge my emotion, and then respond the way I want to respond, not the way I just gut respond.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes to mind is it kind of related to a lot of things I've done, but also related to starting this podcast is a quote I heard recently that's like, courage begets courage.
Yeah.
So the more you try new things, like you were just talking about, or put yourself out there or do something new, the easier it is to do the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And it really just it really just kind of builds. And so I think courage begets courage is another thing I would think about.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's a good billboard.
Thank you. That's a better one than my first one.
Yeah.
So last thing about you is like, where, I don't know if you want people to find you, but where can people find you? Where can people find you? Where can people find Comet Labs if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, like, you can find us on our website, cometlabs.io. No, like we're in the Bay Area. Like we're pretty active.
Social media, stuff like that.
Yeah, like we have you can sign up for our blog.
All right.
In our newsletter, we have a rockin' newsletter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, our head of marketing, Derek, is actually a pretty like cool genius.
Ooh.
And he's put together a cool like monthly newsletter that just talks about like trends and topics in like AI, in the robotic space, like some of our activities and investments, and like I'm starting a new thing called Why We Invest, that just like summarizes like why we do an investment, once we do it. And it's me. I'm a creative writer, so Derek edits my writings a lot.
Nice.
But yeah, like that I think that's a cool way to like keep updated on what we're doing and what we're looking at. Yeah, it's a good one.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's about it.
Cool.
We're at exactly an hour almost. So.
Bam.
Perfect.
Excellent.
So thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, sorry if we got off track.
No, that's the point.
That's
we want to get off track.
It was fun.
We don't want to be on track.
Cool.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
And thanks for everybody for listening.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Epic Human Podcast. Please remember to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever app you happen to be using. And if you want to keep up to date on the latest Epic Human Podcast, please follow us on Twitter or Facebook at Epic Human Pod. And if you have any ideas for guests or feedback on the show, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.